This is the Friends of History Debating Society. I am Gaius, John Batchelor, and I welcome Germanicus, Michael Vlahos, to Londinium Chronicles. We are watching the transformation of the 21st century into something romantic that resembles our history here in the first century AD. We're in Londinium. We're peaceful men. We're far from Rome. We're Equus class. We don't spend money on senatorial tricks. We're surrounded by retired centurions who are very happy men, having survived 25 years in the Legion. They're now with their families. We are not under any threat whatsoever in Londinium. However, we're aware that the Emperor Domitian is unpopular and will come to a rough ending, as many emperors do in the first century AD. However, what compels us is the events of the 21st century. We enjoy it immensely. We can see everything from here to the 21st, but we especially like the 21st because there's a wall that we can't get through. We can't see the 22nd. It's frustrating to us. We're imagining the 21st and where it's going, but right now, the best understanding, our Roman understanding, is what we call the year of four emperors. It happened violently between Nero and the end of the Julian-Claudian reign. It was 68 AD, which is from where we are right now, more than 20 years ago. We were young men. And in 68 AD, Nero had lost the confidence of the Senate. In fact, they wanted him gone. Nero was a troublesome person. He saw himself as an actor. He won all the prizes when he went to the Olympics. He sang on the stage. He wanted to be an actor so much that he neglected his duties as emperor. And the legates, the generals who guarded the frontier, were unhappy with him. So in quick succession, a general named Galba marched on Rome, and Nero committed suicide. So Galba was named emperor. And then a general named Otho challenged Galba and marched on Galba and killed him. Otho was then challenged by Vitellius. These are all generals. And eventually Otho committed suicide. And then Vitellius was defeated by an army unit that was representing another general, Vespasian. And when Vitellius was defeated, the mob tore him apart, leaving us with an emperor named Vespasian, a general who had not participated in the bloodbath, but now was going to establish his time in office. All of Rome experienced civil war while this was going on, including burning big pieces of it. I tell the story quickly because it occurs to Germanicus and I that we're now entering a period of five emperors. There is former President Trump and his choice, Senator Vance, for two emperors. There is President Biden and former Senator, now Vice President Harris, for four emperors. And with Mr. Biden stepping aside, now Ms. Harris, who is endorsed by Mr. Biden, but not legally bound, will need to choose a vice president if she is to be the nominee. Five emperors of equal weight in two parties. And what this tells us in 68, 69 AD is that there will not be calm. There will be turmoil. There will be men and women coming forward saying, why not me? And that will go on for some time, perhaps a generation, perhaps more than that. Germanicus, the year of five emperors, it doesn't match up. It doesn't tell easily. But then again, our year of four emperors didn't match up, and we're still living with the residue because our unhappy emperor Domitian, who is disdained by the Senate, will also end badly. How do you measure our time with four emperors compared to what the American Empire, which inherited Roman institutions, the American Empire now begins the year of five emperors? How are they doing compared to how we did? Good evening to you, Germanicus.
Good evening, Gaius. And your question is a bit transcendental in the sense that it represents a kind of conceptual and rhetorical breakthrough, in part because Americans and their religious vision of American exceptionalism see everything that happens initiated and delivered by Americans as not merely de novo, but unique in world history. And what we have come to in our conversations is, I think, something more profound. We've been able to actually compare America and its ruling constitutional order to the Roman imperial constitutional order. And I think we've been doing so with fidelity, and even more so with some precision. And I think at this point, to be able to compare what is happening in the United States today with the same sorts of dynamics that were unfolding in Rome in the time of Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian is a wonderful opening up of our horizons if we choose to seize the aperture and actually gaze into the insight that it offers. And that insight is that the American presidential system, as it has evolved over 200 plus years, has evolved in the same way that Rome evolved from a republic to an empire. And the presidential system is both coterminous with and directly to be compared to the Roman imperial order. The American president is like an emperor, and the imperial system flourished and worked in contrast to the failed republican constitutional order that had existed for hundreds of years before, because it was flexible and it had a pathway to succession and legitimacy. The American system today is akin to the Roman because the president is like an emperor. If you look at Mr. Biden attempting to rule through executive order, and the place that the executive order has taken in American life to replace the actual laws passed by Congress, and the way in which the president controls the military and can engage in war on his own personal fiat is exceptionally close to the Roman, but also exceptionally close to the Roman system. The Roman imperial system is what we have seen unfolding in the last several weeks, namely that when emperors stumble, when they are no longer capable of managing what was then, in our time, in the first century, a huge world order, and what is today, in the time of the American empire, also a gigantic world-girdling empire, you need to have the capacity in the constitutional order to replace an emperor who's failing. And that is what has just happened. And yet, and we talked about this last week, and yet the American imperial constitutional order does not have any longer an institutionalized and collectively embraced pathway to legitimating imperial succession.
Yes, what we observe now, and my question will continue, what we observe now is equals, no one superior to any other. And there is no provision for that to be resolved quickly. Democracy is messy, and we also have no confidence whatsoever in the succession struggle that's ahead of us. There's a succession struggle in the Democratic Party. There's a succession struggle in the Republican Party. After all, Mr. Trump is very senior, will be, if elected,
Yes.
one of the most senior presidents ever elected. And so we can presume that Mr. Vance was chosen because of his age. That's fine. That's fine, Emperor. But with Mr. Biden, in endorsing Ms. Harris, as he says, he steps aside from his campaign. He doesn't resolve the other younger members of the Democratic Party who are equally thought of as possible emperors. There's no resolution here. There won't be a resolution. Go ahead.
No, the overriding utility of comparing the American constitutional order to the Roman imperial order is that it highlights the kind of transition period we're in, because the Roman Republic, like the American Republic, relied on elections. They were not democratically, conducted, but they were more collective representation of the voice of the people. That is all gone by the board. In the last several presidential successions, there has been less and less of a democratic element or a Republican element, voting and elections, and more of an orchestrated ritual of succession. And that ritual has now broken down. It all but broke down in the year 2000, but it definitely broke down in 2020. And so today, we need to actually seriously think about how imperial succession works. And no one is thinking about that. Everyone is simply kicking, as they say in cliche land, kicking the can down the road as though, well, we'll have an election and hopefully it'll work out. Well, the Romans had that problem in the imperial period. And as we discussed, they solved that through very crisp, decisive, short civil wars. And then, okay, here's the emperor, because everyone else has been defeated, as in the AD 69, the year of the four emperors.
The daggers come out.
We do not have that now. We do not have a way to achieve a succession. And in fact, the Democratic Party has no way forward to achieve a succession within their own ranks to choose a replacement for Mr. Biden. It's all very murky. And I think the most interesting dimension of what we're experiencing today is the constitutional dimension. How will we construct a new working constitutional framework for what has become, whether we like it or not, an imperial system?
I mentioned Germanicus in no particular order. At the end of last week, the American intelligence community warned the Russians not to send anti-ship missiles to the Houthis, a renegade group in North Yemen who are quite sophisticated about launching strikes against Red Sea shipping with drones, with sea drones, with air drones, and with missiles. Very sophisticated. The warning was because, I'm told, the Russians are concerned that the missiles deployed by NATO to the Ukrainians are capable of striking in Russia, striking infrastructure, striking troop concentrations, striking industries. And so the Russians are warning the Americans, if you give those missiles to the Ukrainians and they use them, we'll give anti-ship missiles to the Houthis and they will use them, and that will constrict global trade. It will damage all of us, but especially the allies in Europe. And the twist then is that the Houthis then launched a drone against Tel Aviv, and that led to a casualty. The Israelis fighting the Gaza war, standing off against the Hezbollah in the north, knowing that Tehran is driving all of these surrogates, launched an airstrike against the port where the Houthis take the missiles in and set it on fire. That's where we are right now. I mention all this because while the Americans are going through their particular turmoil, the war that we've been told must be contained, otherwise it'll become a wider war, has become a wider war. When the Russians are warning the Americans not to do something in Ukraine that has a consequence in the Red Sea against shipping by name the nation, and the Israelis are striking Yemen, a sovereign territory, the war is wider. My simple question to you, Germanicus, is during the time of the Year of Four Emperors, there was no time to concern themselves with the frontiers, the Rhine, for example. The Rhine legate was involved in looking at Rome. The legate from London was involved in looking at Rome. Is that going on now? Is America completely turned inward? And these, what you'd have to say, reckless decisions made by our adversaries are unchecked.
The better comparison in antiquity, very late antiquity, as a matter of fact, to the situation we may be in now, rather than 69 AD, which was a happy little civil war without any external fears, pressures, or anxieties. The year 602 was a terrifying year. And that was the year that the Emperor Maurice was assassinated by a leading officer of a mutiny in the army. And because Maurice and his 5 sons were killed wantonly, things fell apart on the eastern border, and Khosrow, who had been raised by Maurice, the Persian, Shah, invaded the Roman Empire and almost brought it to its knees. Therefore, I think we need to address the problem that you raised with that very popular term of art among the American military, namely, the enemy gets a vote. And this was a kind of bête noire term for me when I was teaching strategy at the War College, the Naval War College. And that was the enemy doesn't get a vote. The enemy is everything, and you are in a relationship with the enemy. And anything the enemy does is something that you need to urgently respond to and should have anticipated. And the fact is that if you think the enemy is simply a player that can insert certain difficulties, you don't understand the actual situation that you inhabit. And I think America's strategic situational awareness is shot because it's based on this existential assumption that was given to us in the anointment that followed the fall of the Soviet Union, namely that we had suddenly become, the divine champion of the Lord's mission on earth, and that in military terms, we were the gods of war. And so this was ratified by the Gulf War in 1991. And ever since, we have lived in a world of fantasy and delusion. And now that the various conflicts that we're involved in are heading south, and the hollowness of American military capability is being exposed everywhere. And in the case of the Houthi, it is demonstrated with the absolute impotence of our sea power. We delivered strikes against the Houthi and it did nothing. And then we had to withdraw our carrier battle group. Who knows why, but definitely nothing was happening. And Israeli strikes are kind of punitive laying on of the lash, a kind of whip to hurt the Houthi. But, the Houthi, they've already suffered hundreds of thousands of casualties fighting a vengeful Saudi Arabia. And they're in this for the long haul. They're like, I don't know, they're like warriors out of the Iliad. They're not going to be stopped. And so the war hasn't simply widened, it becomes ever intensified. And as we've talked about the war in Ukraine, the actions of NATO have been perfectly clear to Russians that our attempt to bring down Russia using Ukraine as a kind of proxy puppet, which has led to the loss of 1 million Ukrainian casualties, has done nothing for Russia to hurt Russia, except to unleash what I've called, 10 years ago, a Russian renovatio. Russia is more confident, more energized, more successful, and more looking forward to a big future than it has been since, I don't know, the 1870s or the 1880s. And we, on the other hand, have brought Europe to a point where it is weak, pusillanimous, fearful, and a kind of albatross around our neck. It's a paradox that beggars belief.
We're on the way to the theater, but we pause just for a moment to be sentimental about how the might of Rome does succession. We do not vote in the American style. The Senate has favorites, yes, but you can never tell. It's whimsical. The decision is often made by a small group, sometimes for money, sometimes for fear of not being paid. The Praetorians, for example, you best pay them quickly and a lot. Otherwise, they have been known to be troublesome. However, in the course of all these centuries, we have many inventive ways of succession. They come to a final chapter, however. It's very difficult to imagine retired emperors. Germanicus, succession for us, we like it to be definitive. We don't like 2 or 3 choices afterwards. We're successful at that. The Americans have never achieved it. How did we achieve it?
Well, the Romans had, a phrase, damnatio imperio, in which the emperor would be not merely defenestrated, but his imago would be erased from the standards of the legions. And it's paradoxical that throughout the 1500 years of the Roman imperial order, there was only one instance where an emperor was defenestrated and then came back, and that was Justinian II. And by the way, Justinian II was not murdered. The so-called Byzantine Romans were more elegant in depriving an emperor of his ability to return, and that was to cut off his nose, later to blind him. But at this period in the 7th century, they would cut off his nose. So there was an emperor, Justinian II, who was part of a successful dynasty in holding back the onslaught of the Arabs, and this harkens back to Phocas and the assassination of Maurice and what happened after. But so he was, say, a century and a half later, and he made a lot of enemies. And so he was overthrown and his nose was cut off. And he was exiled to, of all places, the Crimea. Well, he was able to orchestrate a return employing the assistance of the Bulgar Khan. And he returned with an all-new prosthetic gold nose. And he was known as Rhinomatos, the slit nose. It is quite funny. He was no more successful on his return, but it is kind of a reminder to us that there's up to now only been one American president who came back, and that was Grover Cleveland. And it does seem now that the possibility of another Justinian II is with us. And this time, Mr. Trump is not missing his nose, but he certainly is missing part of his ear. So there is a kind of resonance here. And it does indicate the problem that we inhabit, which was a problem that Rome had at various points, certainly with Justinian II, and that is, what if you can't get rid of someone permanently? And you know that blue worked tirelessly to get rid of Mr. Trump, to put him through a damnatio imperio. Everything possible was done, including the creation of, a series of, shall we say, trumped up crimes, impeachment again and again. And it's rather unbelievable. And yet he came back.
We have 1 minute, Germanicus. We have to get to the theater. Please continue.
No, all I'm saying is that the contretemps and the unfolding crisis that we live in is relieved by some of these aspects of color commentary, and yet that does not and should not deflect us from an awareness of the gravity of the situation we face, which is, I think, bottom line, how do we create a new constitutional order?
The year of 5 emperors, maybe. Germanicus is Michael Vlahos. I am Gaius, John Batchelor. We're going on to the theater after we sacrifice to the god Augustus, who gave us this Roman Empire we enjoy, the might of Rome. I'm John Batchelor.